Hello, 2BC, and welcome back to our series on spiritual practices. Now, in the last year, in 2025, we went through and explored different spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices throughout the whole year. And we decided we wanted to do that again. There are so many more that we can explore, and we may revisit a few that we've already done in the past and just kind of take another pass at them. So I'm very excited what we have coming up this year. And so this is our first video for 2026. And we're going to start the year off with a prayer practice. And there are so many different prayer practices. We've already done several, but this one is called the prayer of Examen. Now, the prayer of Examen is a practice that has been used by followers of Jesus for centuries, dating to at least the early 1500s, if not before. And it is a discernment practice is a practice for discerning how God is at work in our midst on a moment by moment basis throughout our day, kind of through the normal flow of your day. So you discern what God was saying, what he was doing. So like his voice, his activity, all throughout our day. And it is a way of reflecting and thinking over and praying over your day with God. So you're allowing him to probe the depths of your heart and help you to take a spiritual inventory of sorts. It's like, where did you notice God at work? Where did you feel like you followed him really well and were in tune with what he was doing? Maybe where did you not feel like you were following him well? Or where you missed the mark during your day? Also, you might reflect on where you felt the most connected to God and what he was doing, versus where you felt the most disconnected. So put simply, prayer of Examen is a God-guided reflection over your day. You'll sit and kind of rewind the tape of your day in a prayerful way, and let God bring to your mind some of these things about where he was at work and what things happened. You see all the things you did, all the people you encountered, all the ways you responded, all the ways you didn't respond, all of the different things. And it's not an exercise in rationalizing our actions. We're not trying to make excuses for why we did or didn't do something. We're also not trying to beat up ourselves for doing things wrongly or not living up to our own standards. And we're also not trying to inflate our ego of saying, look how great I am. I listened to God really well today. It's supposed to be a very intentional, contemplative, reflective practice in which we are learning to discern how God is at work. So we learn what his patterns are. We learn what his voice sounds like by inviting him to help us see it as we look back. So I don't know about you, but for me, I often do a better job of knowing what God is like, seeing how God has been at work in my life when I look backwards. It's a lot harder for me to notice it in the moment. And so I guess you could say the goal of prayer of Examen would be to start to discern those patterns of God's movement and action and his voice. And as we discern those patterns, it will make us better able to respond and recognize his work and his activity in the moment. I mean, sometimes it can be really easy to recognize what he's doing, but other times it's like, oh, I look backwards, like, yeah, God was doing this, and I see this thread of his work through this situation or through my life, but maybe in the moment I didn't necessarily notice it. But prayer of Examen gives us that opportunity on a daily basis to look back and notice what God has been doing, because God is with us and he is at work in our midst, in our lives, and in the lives of those around us all the time. He never stops being at work. He doesn't just take a day off. He's always there. He's always at work. And so it's important for us to learn how to better hear him and notice what he's up to in the course of a normal day. So as we step into this new year, we are going to practice the prayer of Examen at the close of our day. Now, ideally, you would do this as like the last thing that you do in a given day. But I know that schedules don't always allow for that. So maybe you need to do it in the morning and do it for the previous day. But taking that intentional time to look back over the last day and see what God is doing. So every day we want to ideally end our day by doing the prayer of Examen. And so we want to set aside about 5 to 10 minutes each evening to dwell in God's presence, to reflect with him over your day, and to spend some time in prayer. And maybe even some journaling about any insights that came up. So let's walk through with this process. would look like. So we start by reading Psalm 139. Now you can certainly read the whole thing. It is a little bit of a longer psalm. Not as long as Psalm 119, but it is a longer psalm, and it's a great psalm. But it talks about God's presence with us. At a minimum, let's read verses 1 through 5 and verses 23 and 24. So I'm going to go ahead and read those now. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. And then verses 23 and 24. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is anything offensive in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So you begin your time by reading these words every day and letting these last two verses, 23 and 24, become your prayer. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And then you continue your reflection. You rewind and replay the tape of your day in your head. See every person you encountered, every conversation you had, every place you went, maybe everything you did, every situation you experienced. And reflect with God. We have some different questions for you to reflect on each day. There's seven different sets of questions. And you can, we'll put a link to our blog where you can find those questions. But they're questions such as, which part of my day was most life-giving? Which was the least life-giving? And where was God at work in these moments? Or questions such as, where did I notice God at work today and join him in what he was doing? And what opportunities to join God did I miss or overlook? Or one of my favorites, at what point today was I most living out of the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5? At what point was there an absence of the fruit of the Spirit? And so we think back over our day and we reflect on these questions and we let God guide our thoughts. It's a reflection that we do with God. It's not just us doing it. We're inviting God to do it with us. And that's why we begin our time with Psalm 139, specifically 23 and 24. Because we're asking God to search us, to know us, to show us what we have done that maybe isn't matching up to what he wants, but also to connect ourselves with what he's doing in our midst and giving him the opportunity to speak to our hearts and help us to see where he's been at work in our day. So as you think through those things, take note of any insights or thoughts that you have, maybe something that was surprising or a place where you saw God at work that you weren't expecting or you didn't notice in the moment. I encourage you to write those down. I know not everybody is a journaler in the traditional sense of writing it down in a journal, but record at least a list of ways that God has been at work in your world. And then when we get to the end of the month, you'll have a whole record of, hey, God's been doing these things in my life. And maybe there'll be a pattern. Maybe you won't be able to tell one yet. But maybe you'll start to see like, oh, this is where I may be struggling and I need to maybe read some scripture and spend some time reflecting with God on how I can grow and living out the fruits of the Spirit. Or maybe you're saying, wow, I didn't realize that God was at work in this relationship and how he was at work in this relationship. And now you can see more clearly what God is doing. So as we go through this month, I can't think of a better way for us to start this year of exploring spiritual practices than to slow down and begin to notice what God is up to and to exercise those discernment muscles. Because sometimes I think that we can just get stuck in our same old, read my Bible, pray, repeat, read my Bible, pray, repeat. And there's never a replacement for reading scripture and praying just in general, but to incorporate some of these intentional prayer practices where we are trying to notice what God is doing and inviting him to speak to us in a specific way. I think they're invaluable in what they can add to our relationship with God and how they help us to grow as disciples of Jesus. So I encourage you to head over to the Developing Disciples blog on 2bc.org and check out those lists of questions. You can use all of them, or you can maybe have a favorite couple that you use for the whole month. And whatever you need to do, whatever works for you is fine. But take the time to slow down every single day for the month of January and reflect with God on what He's doing in your life. I'm very excited for this year of continuing to explore spiritual practices. And I really look forward to all the things that y'all will share with me about how God is at work in your life. I know some of y'all will tell me, oh, this has been great. I've learned this, or God's showing me that. And I love to hear those things. So feel free to reach out. You can definitely comment on this video if you would like to, but reach out in some way because I would love to hear what God is doing in your life. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.